Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Anna, and I'm a project assistant at Clean Energy States Alliance. I work with Todd, who is our moderator today on our energy storage projects and programs. Our webinar today is presented by the DOE, Office of Electricity Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, and it is about new federal funding opportunities for energy storage, what's available, and how to qualify. Before I pass this over to our really exciting panel speakers today, I'd like to go over some quick webinar logistics. All of our attendees today are in listen-only mode. We have a couple of options to join the audio portion of our webinar today. You can call in via telephone, or you can connect using your computer's audio, mic, and speakers. If you'd like to minimize your webinar's console, you can do so by clicking the orange arrow that you see circled on the control panel. You can also click on that arrow to expand the webinar console. And one thing you might like to do with your webinar console is to submit your questions and comments. We're aiming to save between 15 to 20 minutes at the end of everyone's presentations for questions and answers. But please type in your questions and comments when you think of them. Do not wait until the end. We'll get to as many questions as we can. We have a lot of folks registered for this webinar, which is both exciting and will also mean that our question and answer session should be really good. One final note, this webinar is being recorded. We will send you an email with a copy of the webinar recording and the slides within about a week. We will also post all of this information to our website, cisa.org/webinars. That's a good URL to know because that is also where we post all of our upcoming webinars and have all of our archives for our many, many webinars that we've hosted in the past. So with that, I will now pass the mic over to my colleague, Todd Olinsky-Paul. He is a senior project manager at Cisa, and he is our moderator today.
Great, thank you, Anna. Welcome everybody to another in our STAP webinar series. We have a fantastic webinar today with some really good information on new money available from federal programs for energy storage from numerous different budgets and numerous different types of programs, so it's complex, but we've got some very good speakers who are going to explain it, and hopefully everybody will come out of this webinar with a much better understanding of what to do to qualify for various grants and various types of incentives that are available. I want to do a brief introduction of Clean Energy States Alliance, Cisa. We are a nonprofit located in Vermont. We are active across the country, working with our members who are state clean energy funds. You can see many of their logos here on the screen. We help them with developing clean energy policy and programs of all sorts. And this particular STAP program, Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, is something that many of the state members have shared in over the years. And Anna, you could just advance the slide, please. STAP is conducted under contract with Sandia National Laboratories. It's funded by US DOE, Office of Electricity, and we have Dr. Imre Gyuk today from DOE with us. We also have Dan Borneo here for participation in the Q&A after the presentations. He's from Sandia, so we want to thank both of them for their support over the years. STAP is basically a program that pulls together federal, state, and other partners to produce and develop large-scale energy storage demonstration projects across the country. A number of these are indicated on the map. I actually need to update this map. It's a little out of date now, but you can get an idea of the kinds of projects that STAP has helped to support over the years. We also do a lot of these webinars. This is a sort of public information sharing effort to disseminate information on energy storage to our many stakeholders. There are over 5,000 members of the listserv, and if you were on this webinar, you've probably learned about it because you've gotten some notification through that listserv. And we also increasingly are working with state energy storage programs and policies directly. So in other words, supporting state clean energy agencies and energy officials to stand up new energy storage programs, to develop policies and regulatory structures around energy storage. Next slide, please. So I'm going to, again, thank Dr. Gyuk and Dan Borneo for their support. Next slide. And I'm going to introduce our speakers in order. And you can see their names and pictures here on the slide. Beginning the presentation, we'll have a brief introduction from Dr. Gyuk. He's Director of Energy Storage Research at the DOE Office of Electricity. For the past 2 decades, he's directed the Electrical Energy Storage Research Program there. He supervised the $185 million ARRA stimulus funding for grid-scale energy storage demonstrations. And over the years, he has partnered with many states on large-scale energy storage demonstration projects. His work has led to 12 R&D 100 awards, 2 EPA Green Chemistry Challenge Awards, and Lifetime Achievement Awards from Energy Storage Association and NatBat. He is also international in his scope and internationally recognized as a leader in the energy storage field. We will then hear from Katrina Pielli, who is serving as the Director of the Office of Engagement in the US DOE's new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or Oset. This is a new effort that has been stood up at DOE, and you'll learn more about that when Katrina does her presentation. Previous to this, Katrina served in the DOE Office of Policy, advancing clean energy and supply chain efforts with a focus on the nexus of manufacturing and communities. She's also worked at USAID, which is the Agency for International Development, where she led Power Africa's off-grid energy access program, which focused on delivering electricity to 25 to 30 million new households and businesses in sub-Saharan Africa through off-grid energy solutions. And she's held various roles at DOE, White House Council on Environmental Quality, and the US EPA. We will then hear from Ben Shrager. Ben is an engineer with the US DOE Office of Electricity Advanced Grid Research and Development, where he works on and manages electric grid modernization and energy storage R&D projects. He's led several congressionally directed reports on grid-enhancing technologies, as well as the energy storage response to the February 2021 Supply Chain Executive Order. Ben is also managing the Energy Storage Grand Challenge project, designing a framework for optimizing energy storage R&D portfolios. Finally, we will hear from Russ, President of Cleantech Strategies Llc, which is a consulting firm focused on energy storage, renewables, power electronics, microgrids, and advanced materials. Prior to this, Russ worked for 21 years in business and legal positions with private and public companies, and for 10 years as a commercial and litigation attorney. His resume includes previous positions with Uni Energy Technologies and General Electric. And as I mentioned, Dan Borneo from Sandia National Laboratories will also be joining us for the Q&A after the presentations. So please go ahead and advance the slides. I think that's all I have for by way of introduction. I would just say that if you have joined us as a member of the attending audience, we have over 300 attendees so far. That's a lot of people. We'll do our best to get to all of your questions, or as many as we can. Please facilitate this by typing them into the question console early as they occur to you, and not waiting until the very end of the presentations when they will all flood in at once and make it difficult to sort through them. Thank you very much, and I will now turn you over to Dr. Gyuk.
Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be addressing ESTAP once more, our loyal audience of many, many different webinars. During the last 20 years, energy storage has moved from being a niche technology that hardly anyone knew about into the hottest technology in the electricity business. It's not been easy. We first built a small community that involved academics, utility folks, potential vendors, and also regulators. It was clear that all these diverse disciplines needed to be involved. Then came the first pilot installations, small scale. We were happy to reach 500 kW. A number of business cases were developed. Mostly these were niche applications. Then we showed that frequency regulation worked twice as well if you use storage. FERC agreed, and there was the first viable business case. At about the same time, the price for lithium-ion batteries made them affordable. States like California and New York provided appropriate regulatory structure. ARRA gave the industry a big boost, and then energy storage deployment became exponential. But there are issues. For one thing, lithium-ion batteries still have thermal events on occasion. And that's something we want to minimize or eliminate. Recycling has not yet become routine and the supply chain is vulnerable. We have yet to build a domestic capability for lithium batteries. But there are even bigger issues. Climate change due to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is becoming more and more evident, and the need to decarbonize is becoming paramount. But for that, we will need storage of medium and long duration. And in turn, new technologies, flow batteries, zinc, sodium ion, and others. Eventually, thermal gravity, and chemical storage. We are on very untried ground here, and much research and many pilot demonstrations are needed. So it's very fortuitous that the importance of energy storage has now gained official recognition with the passing of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which provides very substantial funding to address all the crucial issues of energy storage. It also calls attention to social equity and the importance of providing for the needs of less affluent urban, rural, and tribal communities. It's very important that we clearly understand the provisions of the Act and that we take the best advantage of its provisions. And that is why we bring you this STEP webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Imre. That's the introductory remarks, and I think we need to bring the slides up again so that Katrina can give her presentation. Katrina, you're on.
Great, thank you so much. It's nice to be here. Thank you to Cisa and the STEP team, very much appreciated. You can go to the next slide, please. So the Biden administration, as Dr. Gyuk just mentioned, really set bold climate goals for both carbon-free electricity and a net zero economy. And this was bolstered by the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which established my office, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, to deliver $21.5 billion to support large-scale clean energy demonstration projects. And we do believe that this will contribute to those goals that I mentioned, achieving net zero emissions by 2050, which will require incremental investment of about $300 billion a year every year until 2050, or $10 trillion total, to bring the emerging clean energy and decarbonization technologies to scale. And we think that Oset will help accelerate these clean energy technologies from the lab to market and fill a critical innovation gap on the path to achieving these goals, while also mitigating the risks that allow private sector investors and developers to act. Next slide, please. So the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or Oset as we're pronounced, has a mission to deliver clean energy demonstration projects at scale in partnership with the private sector to accelerate deployment, market adoption, and the equitable transition to a decarbonized energy system. Next slide. And to achieve our mission, we have a clear mandate. So first is to serve as the primary DOE office to deliver full-scale clean energy demonstration projects and project management oversight excellence. And so as you will see in a moment, our list of provisions from the infrastructure law, we really are taking the time now to thoughtfully design these programs and create demonstration project management oversight center of excellence to support. And you may know that DOE's track record on successful demonstration project management is not perfect, but we are applying lessons learned to Oset. We're focusing more on front-end planning as we launch these key multi-billion-dollar demonstration projects. We're not only rewriting how we oversee project management for demonstrations, Oset will also support other offices to ensure a consistent approach to implementing capital-intensive, large-scale demonstration projects across DOE. Second, we're helping to ensure 100% clean electricity by 2035 and net zero emissions by 2050. So Oset is filling, as I mentioned, that critical innovation gap on the path to achieving our nation's climate goals. We will invest in clean energy projects that support job creation, advance environmental justice, and facilitate an inclusive energy transition in all communities, ensuring that benefits flow to disadvantaged communities. Third, unlock and scale the trillion-dollar clean energy follow-on investment from the private sector and other sources of capital. We want Oset to be a trusted organization that funds these large-scale projects to help reduce risk, to unlock private sector follow-on investment and deploy these technologies. And so while we deeply appreciate the billions provided for clean energy demonstrations, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the trillions that we need to mobilize to meet our climate goals. And so the only way for us to do that is through engaging the private sector early and often to maximize the impact of our funding by learning how industry and the investors approach their decisions. Fifth, we're maintaining a risk-balanced, defensible portfolio of investments. And what this means is that we will be reviewing project applications to ensure those selected for these demonstrations are viable at scale and are replicable. We want to scale down risk so we can scale up the clean energy technology deployment. With the substantial risk inherent to these projects, we recognize and actually expect that some of them will fail, and we will apply those lessons learned as we move forward. And finally, Oset will leverage the private sector and the broader energy ecosystem to inform the commercialization efforts. Our forthcoming demonstration projects are public-private partnerships that will leverage Oset and stakeholders' expertise in technical, market, and local community needs. We will continue to solicit and consider input from all stakeholders to shape project selection, location, funding, management, and oversight of these technologies through a variety of venues, including requests for information, public workshops, listening sessions, and meetings. Next slide, please. I'll just spend a quick minute on this slide because we think that it does help show where Oset fits. So you see at the top the typical technology readiness level, and I wanted to demonstrate here the clear role that we see Oset having in commercializing clean energy technologies. So we connect the research, development, and early stage demonstration projects, including those funded from DOE technology offices, as you see on the left-hand side of this slide, with the other DOE programs such as Loan Programs Office, as well as private sector. Next slide, please. So we often get questions about what does Oset look like. So I wanted just to flash up here briefly our org chart because I think it might be helpful because it does look a bit different than other DOE technology offices. So very briefly, a couple of things to point out for you. We have a portfolio strategy team that develops our multi-year program plans and helps design our programs and monitor our projects at the portfolio level. We also have a team of project management oversight, and this will provide that world-class project management oversight that I mentioned, that center of excellence will live here. We also have a division on technical and engineering support that will really be focused on ensuring robust and consistent technical evaluations. And then finally, you see my office at the top right, the engagement office that is really integrated with all of our other teams to make sure that all of our work and outreach to everyone from investors to industry, communities, and tribal governments are all integrated into how we move forward. And so if you want to talk to us more, please feel free to reach out to me, and my email will be at the end of the slide. And finally, of course, we have our legal counsel. Next slide. So I mentioned that we had $21.5 billion from Congress. These are the lists of provisions or programs that Oset will be implementing. We will be advancing 50-50 cost share agreement in general for our projects. And the idea with that is that Oset will take early steps to set up these demonstrations, and our industry partners will assist with the steps that lead to commercialization and deployment. So the ones that I'll focus on here are shown in red. I will cover the first two briefly, and then the next speaker, my colleague Ben, will focus on the last two, which are being implemented in close partnership with the Office of Electricity. So next slide, please. So the program here that we'll talk about is looking at energy improvements in rural and remote areas. So Congress provided us $1 billion for this program, and it's over 5 years to carry out activities in rural or remote areas that will improve the resilience, safety, reliability, and availability of energy and the environmental protection from adverse impacts of generation. Congress told us that rural and remote areas must be less than 10,000 in population. And we do see a list of a number of different opportunities that Congress provided for us that we're considering as we design this program. That includes the overall cost effectiveness of the system, siting and upgrading transmission and distribution lines, microgrids, which might be of significant interest to this crowd, as well as opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for energy generation in rural and remote areas. And certainly storage could fit there as well. Energy efficiency is explicitly included. And so as you can see just from this slide alone, the program is quite broad, and there are opportunities for many different types of demonstration projects in this that will be administered by Oset. We will share more information in the coming months as we move forward, including a request for information and stakeholder workshops that you'll learn more about in the fall. In the meantime, we have been working closely with our national laboratory partners, Sandia being one of them, to do some targeted outreach to really learn what types of technical assistance might be available and be of interest to different community stakeholders. So we are trying to do our homework, which is consistent with the rest of Oset's approaches to really try and design these programs thoughtfully. Next slide, please. The other program, just to highlight for you, is our clean energy demonstrations on current and former mine land. So Congress provided $500 million for us here to conduct these programs, which they are explicitly asking us to invest in up to 5 geographically diverse, and 2 of those will be solar projects. These demonstrations will provide models for mine land development and community engagement that can be used by the private sector to unlock the potential of mine land for siting clean energy. Congress did direct us to prioritize job creation, greenhouse gas emission reduction, and the economic benefit for host communities. Here again, we're working closely with our national labs to understand the technical, regulatory, and economic challenges associated with clean energy development on mine land. As you can also see here, energy storage is explicitly listed by Congress on one of the eligible opportunities. We issued a request for information that actually closes in mid-August. So if you have not seen that, please let me know and I can point that to you. It's online, and we would welcome your input there as well. We do plan to also host workshops in the fall for this and start our technical assistance in the fall as well. So stay tuned for more information there. So next slide just provides you with some contact information, both for myself and for my office. Again, if you want to reach out and talk to us more, please feel free. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ben, who's going to talk to you about the energy storage provisions, which does include some from the Office of Electricity and from Oset. So with that, thank you so much.
Hey, Katrina, thank you so much for your presentation. I have one question that came in that I think it would be worth answering before we move on to Ben, which is, please explain what is meant by demonstration projects.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have the broad concept of demonstration projects, but it will be more tailored depending on the specific provision. And so here what we're looking to do, I flashed up that TRL slide. And so we're wanting to make sure that we are not doing something that is very early stage. So nothing that is straight off the bench, not a first of its kind technology pilot, technology that has never been demonstrated before, that is likely not going to be in scope for our programs. We're really looking to take something that has had a limited demonstration, perhaps not at a large scale, or has already done a very successful set of pilots, and now you want to move to a larger scale demonstration. In general, that's the type of thing we're looking for, so that we can invest in that to then unlock follow-on private sector funding for the next tranche of demonstration or full-scale commercial projects. But again, it will vary, and so I would point people to the specific provision information as it's released. In particular, for the rural and remote, that one will look a little bit different.
Okay, thank you. Ben, you're up.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon or good morning. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak about the Long Duration Energy Storage for Everyone Everywhere, EASY program. For those of you who have been at some of our past webinars and listening sessions, some of this information might be repeat, but hopefully there's still some interesting tidbits here and get some excitement around some upcoming announcements that we're planning. So I want to give an overview more about DOE's perspective on energy storage and some of our broader strategy of how we're thinking about the future of storage. Many of you are probably familiar with the long duration storage shot target. This is our goal to reduce storage costs by 90% from a 2020 lithium ion baseline for long duration systems that can deploy 10 plus hours in 1 decade. So by the end of this decade, by 2030. And this aggressive cost target will get storage down to a very affordable and very feasible cost for widespread deployment. However, we're not there yet. And for all the different storage technologies that are out there that could be used for grid storage, none of them currently meet this 5 cents per kilowatt hour levelized cost of storage. And even in our current business as usual projections for getting up to 2030, none of the technologies are there yet, which is why we need more investment and more demonstrations at scale. And these at scale demonstrations are a major step towards these cost reductions and performance improvements that can help us get to the 5 cents per kilowatt hour goal for 2030. So a way that we're getting to these demonstrations is through the Energy Storage for Everyone Everywhere initiative. And through this goal, we have over $500 million to demonstrate new storage technologies, validate first-of-a-kind systems, pilot storage in new regions that have not before seen energy storage deployments at scale, and increase the resilience of critical government facilities. With this sort of four-pronged approach, we were able to demonstrate storage at a scale that we've previously not, and hopefully enable new and innovative technologies to be used for future grid deployments. However, EASY doesn't cover everything. There are still activities that are even beyond the scope, including scaling up domestic manufacturing and further incentives to accelerate deployment. So these demonstrations are a really exciting way to get us a lot of the way there, but there are certainly more follow-on activities that we can also be excited about that we are hoping for in the future. So once again, there's sort of these 4 programs in this sort of 4-pronged approach: EASY validation, EASY piloting, EASY demonstration, and EASY resilience, with a total of over $500 million split up among these 4. This is the same strategy that was in our RFI that we released a few months ago and that we've been talking about. And I'm going to delve into each one of these programs in a little more detail. But do keep in mind that this is still subject to change, and based on the results of the RFI and of our recent stakeholder engagement and listening sessions, any of this is certainly subject to pivot depending on what direction we've heard from you and what we've heard from industry and the general public. So, and one more note on the whole strategy. So our idea is to target storage at increasing scales. So from the storage that's at a lower TRL, essentially, with lower market adoption certainty, but higher technology risk and innovation, we are looking at targeting technologies in that realm with EASY demonstration, all the way through more mature technologies that have already been proven, but might still need to be piloted in new regions that have not yet seen storage. So we're looking at targeting storage across this entire technology spectrum, sort of starting at the point when DOE core R&D ends, and before the point where we're looking at further market development and market deployment focused efforts. So this covers sort of the crux of that commercialization curve, right in that region that Katrina showed a few minutes ago. All right, so just to quickly go through, there's a lot of details we could talk about for these 4 programs and what's included in the language and what we've already put out with regards to its strategy. But I just want to go in order of the different scales of programs that we are currently thinking about and what we've discussed so far with our strategy. So starting with the Easy Demonstration Program, which is the demo initiative in the text and the RFI, this is looking at more innovative, smaller scale systems that have not yet been proven at any kind of field scale yet. So this might be funding behind the meter storage customers for more innovative storage of technologies that may have been proven at a lab scale, but have yet to be proven at any sort of real world environment. We're looking at funding these kinds of systems through cost share grants, prizes, potentially other innovative mechanisms. And we're looking at preparing a cohort of promising technologies for eventual utility scale demonstration. So these are kind of the pre-utility scale demonstrations. And of course, from this and all of the other programs, we're looking at gathering sufficient data to accelerate the feasibility of reaching the next level for technology maturity. Now, once a technology is proven at this scale, then that leads right into our easy validation, the demo projects initiative. And we're intending this to be the largest program funding first of a kind, large scale, utility scale demonstrations. In this statute, we're required to make these project announcements by September 2023, and we must fund at least 3 projects. There can be more, and that was one question we got a couple times with the RFI language. We are also required to fund a few specific projects. So one of them must be of weekly to seasonal durations. One project must be an EV battery second life application, and one must be a long cycle life lithium battery. So we're looking at innovative ways to meet these requirements while also encouraging technology innovation and really exciting ways that we can meet this language while also fostering as many partnerships as possible in the most successful demonstrations. And we are looking at, for these projects, to include diverse partnerships and potentially funding through a variety of interesting mechanisms that we're still in discussions about from what we've heard from you in the RFI and in the listening sessions. So the key goal for easy validation is to be deploying innovative first-of-a-kind technologies at utility scale and really paring down this technology risk that currently holds back a lot of innovative systems from reaching a greater point of commercialization. The sort of final main program in this that we asked about in the RFI at least is this easy piloting, easy pilot grants. And when we say pilot here, we are referring to an opportunity for a community or a region that has not yet deployed storage to pilot storage there for the first time. So storage being piloted in a new region, being piloted for a new use case. And the emphasis here is on overcoming regulatory and institutional barriers for deployment. So here in the text, we're required to include eligible entities, including state energy offices, tribes and tribal organizations, institutions of higher education, electric utilities, and private storage companies. So again, here we're looking at diverse partnerships across many different partners to give them the opportunity to deploy storage for the first time or for a new use case. We're looking at a variety of creative mechanisms to make this happen. And again, the main goal here is to build up enduring capabilities, be that institutional, analytical, or financial, so that targeted communities can invest in storage resources to provide local benefits, everything from resilience to decarbonization, and proving energy storage for a new region and a new use case. Just to touch on a couple other pieces of the EASY program as well, we are also looking at EASY Resilience, which is the joint program. This may not be applicable to most of you on the call, but this will be funding energy storage demonstrations at national lab facilities. So both at DOE national lab facilities and DoD facilities as well. So this is a partnership between the Department of Energy and the Department of Defense. We're looking at reasonably small behind the meter systems that can prove long duration energy storage for a specific resilience application. And of course, as with all these programs, gathering important data while doing so. Finally, we have the Rapid Operational Validation Initiative, which is essentially the data piece that ties together all the rest of the programs. And by collecting performance data from each of these programs, we're able to put it into a framework to help us predict and project out performance data for 15 and 20 years and beyond, with just 1 or 2 years of performance data now. So it's a pretty exciting opportunity and an innovative way of looking at data for all of these different programs. This is a rough idea of the timeline for each of the programs. We're hoping to start the EASY Resilience program fairly soon, led by the EASY Validation and EASY Demonstration announcements for selections in 2023, and later on EASY Piloting and the DoD piece of EASY Resilience. So in terms of just bringing up a couple final things in terms of outreach, we released an RFI on May 12th for feedback on those 3 programs. And we asked a lot of questions. I'm sure most of you saw it, and if you answered, thank you for your feedback. We asked a lot of questions on everything from success metrics to supply chain to climate impact, as well as workforce development and environmental justice priorities. And we held some listening sessions over the last couple of months as well. That has helped us gain some more feedback. So in terms of what we've heard from the RFI, we've gotten respondents from a range of organizations and groups. So we really value all of this input. We're really thrilled with the diversity of groups who responded, especially looking at manufacturers, researchers, trade associations, and even that other category is really large, representing a range of other stakeholders. So we're really appreciative for the excitement around these programs. We've heard a lot from people on funding mechanisms, award sizes, technology portfolio, technology types, but really for all of these questions, we've gotten at least some answers and some interesting feedback that we'll be keeping in mind and using as we develop the programs in more detail. And also for the ROVI and for some cross-cutting issues as well, especially on environmental justice priorities. We got a lot of interesting feedback there as well. So these will be made more clear in the announcements that are planned to be upcoming and how we actually use this data. But I just want to again say thank you to everyone who submitted, and your feedback is vital as we develop these programs in more detail. And that's all I have. So find more updates on energy.gov/bill, and I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Very good presentation. We have one more presenter, Russ Weed from Cleantech Strategies. And before I pass the baton to Russ, I just want to clarify, because we have gotten a couple of questions that are related to the Inflation Reduction Act, which is currently in Congress. This particular webinar is looking at money that is already available under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is already law. The Inflation Reduction Act is still in Congress and not yet final and not yet adopted. So we can't speak to that very much in this webinar, but we will likely have a follow-on webinar to take a look at the money for storage in the Inflation Reduction Act as soon as we have a final law that we can analyze for you. So if you do have questions regarding the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, you can feel free to ask them. I don't know how detailed we can get with that because, again, it's not finalized. And but we will come back with answers on that at a future date. Russ, you're up.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks for the invitation to speak. Thanks to the DOE and Sandia also. I'm sticking to the topic here. Federal funding for energy storage, what's available. So that's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IJA, and how to qualify. So I'm taking a journalistic approach here, who, what, when, where, and how. Next slide, please. A little bit about the Clean Strategies team. There's 3 of us. You could call me a storage veteran, having been in the industry for 11 years. Of course, not much compared to some others on the team here for the webinar. But there's the phrase of dog years. So 11 years in the storage industry. I came in through Flow Batteries 11 years ago, established a Cleantech Strategies as a consulting firm in 2018. I have a legal background. Don't hold it against me. I've worked a lot with startups, mid-market companies, and had a substantial stint with General Electric. But Cleantech Strategies is not just me. It's also Bob Meyer and Chris Murray. You can see their backgrounds on the slide here. Short version, Bob is a power industry veteran, including having managed the Washington State Clean Energy Fund Grid Modernization Program since it began back in 2013. And Chris Murray, who is a Washington, D.C. veteran. One reason for us all to be a team is it has become clear to me through various FOA and RFIs and so forth over the years that one must have the technical expertise, Bob. One must also have boots on the ground, so to speak, feet on the ground in Washington, D.C. for federal opportunities, thus Chris. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with the numbers up front. The business development type might call this the sizing slide. And I'll start on the left. I find keeping track of these different available funding programs, one must master the section numbers. So thus you see on the left the various section numbers, including thou shalt not confuse 4101 with 41001 up at the top and at the bottom for the different programs. Also useful, of course, to have labels, thanks to Imre helping work these labels. And then you see the funding, substantial. So when one reads all, I think it's 10,039 pages of IJA and identifies all the funding opportunities either directly to storage or to other parts of the system where storage contributes, such as resiliency, grid modernization, advanced manufacturing. Under IJA, we're looking at $15.755 billion of potential funding for energy storage. Next slide, please. Now, I knew with Ben speaking that you were going to hear about the 2 rows here that are blue highlighted, the storage demonstrations and the long duration storage demonstrations. I've also, since I saw Katrina addressed both the $1 billion for remote areas and the mine lands. I will also address the other 4 because there are 8 buckets, as you can see here. So next slide, please. So as indicated, now with Katrina's comment, we've covered 2 more of these, but there are 8 and details to each one of them. Next slide, please. So you heard my background, but it also is the case that one should start with the statute. So IJA, I said 1,029, wrong. 1,039 pages, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, if you're measuring it by PDF. You'll see, though, that our laws, our federal laws, have a numbering system that's indicated by the 135 stat 429. So I just starts on page 429 of this volume. It then goes through, as indicated, page 1467. When you do the math, that is 1,039 pages. Passed in November of last year, signed into law. called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Next slide, please. However, we're not just talking about one federal statute. We're talking about multiple federal statutes. So for example, if you look within IJA, you'll see that in a number of places, what IJA is doing is providing appropriations for budget items under the Energy Act of 2020. As you likely know, there's a two-step here when getting funding for programs. You need it budgeted, and then you need it appropriated. There can sometimes be a substantial time gap between those. And here, as an example, both the programs that Ben spoke to were budgeted under the Energy Act of 2020. They are now funded, appropriated under IJA. Next slide, please. Now, let's go big picture for just a moment before we dive further into the statutes and the associated codes and so forth. So what does the public think of infrastructure? Does it know that IJA is in law? Short versions of both of those questions is the public supports infrastructure 2-to-1, and only a quarter of us know that it is signed into law. More of us either don't know or still think it's being worked on. So as well as ourselves, educating ourselves about the ins and outs of IJA, perhaps along the way we should speak to our fellow citizens and let them know that this is in law, and now it is moving forward, as mentioned, more than $15 billion towards storage. Next slide, please. Okay, now you're going to see this template 8 times because there are 8 funding programs under the various sections. I'm starting here with the ones that Ben addressed because there has been more material out there about them. So the demonstration projects with the $355 million, and then you'll see on the long duration subsequent. Each one of these slides for each one of the 8 programs has a DOE link at the bottom that has some of the information indicated up in the slide, but there's also additional information in the slide to give you a DOE reference for each of the programs. Now, on this slide, you'll see that I have green highlighted 2022, which is to bring up a fiscal year issue. As you may know, when one says the federal fiscal year 2022, that ends on September 30th of this year. So 355 was appropriated for fiscal years 22 through 25, but de facto, what we're looking at is fiscal years 24 through 25. So, excuse me, 23 through 25. So because this dates back to the Clean Energy Act of 2020, the dates sometimes, reality is compressing time. Another aspect to mention is the until expended. This is an important thing to see in almost all explicitly of these, so that these funds continue to be appropriated. They don't sunset. This is an important aspect because sometimes these sort of funding programs can sunset. As mentioned, these are activities that were originally budgeted under the Energy Act. This program is administered by OCED with the support of OE and ERE. Great to see that teamwork amongst the DOE team. And then you have the various dates here for when the RFI was released and the webinar and the industry listening session and so forth. And then the quote estimated application opening date Q3 2022, which of course is quite soon, and we hope DOE can accomplish that. We know that there's a lot to manage here. And I also took note of Ben's comment earlier about looking at interesting mechanisms. When the DOE comes out with these funding programs, is it going to be a somewhat a typical FOA funding opportunity announcement, or could they use more innovative mechanisms to get the funding more quickly out into industry and have the stimulating, precipitating effect that we look for, such as other transaction authority, OTA? Don't have time to go into the detail of that now. Next slide, please. So this is the long duration demonstration initiative. So subpart C as opposed to B, 150 million, the same comments as before. Fiscal year 2022 is almost over, and the money is appropriated until expended. And same comment on what sort of funding mechanisms might be used and when the solicitations, whatever form they may take, will come out on the street. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go into some programs that we haven't talked about yet in this this webinar. So this one, 4101, not to be confused with 41101B, right? So this one is $5 billion. It focuses on resilience. I should hasten to say, particularly with respect to this one, this program, there are new dates all the time, and there are different parts to it. So you'll see under sub C, sub D, sub F, that there are different eligible entities. My understanding is that with respect to subpart D there, the formula-based grants to states and tribes, that there's been substantial progress in that process with an RFI having been issued, and I believe grant applications are due on September 30th. So the states and the tribes are busy at work right now preparing their applications. Very substantial amount of money, right? $1 billion per year. And maybe more than that, since, as you can see, once again, fiscal year 2022 is mentioned there. And the eligible entities are pretty broad. Your grid operators, storage operators, so it could be IPPs, and a variety of other electric power industry participants that could seek this funding. And keep in mind, of course, that once the states and the tribes under the formulas get their grants, they then will have their processes. So that is to come as well. Next slide. This is another program under a different section, 4103B, also refers to resilience. It has different funding type. Federal financial assistance, which is a defined term under the Code of Federal Regulations. It's quite a broad term by my reading of it that could include all the way from grants to loans. So it'll be very interesting to see what colors of money is a phrase that's used sometimes that this program brings out. And you'll note the eligible entities, states, tribes, local government units, public utility commissions, which in some states is one funding mechanism. You see the estimated application opening date. The end of Q3 2022 is quite soon, so we will be looking for that one to come out as well. Next slide, please. Katrina touched on this one. That slide, it sounds like we may be seeing more information about this one quite soon. This is an important part of what storage needs to do, along with social equity. Very often there is a correlation with the rural and the remote. And so $1 billion allocated here, I should say appropriated here. And we're going to be looking for more information to come out on this one. I should have mentioned, Katrina did, the requirement that, or the definition of what a rural or a remote area is. City, town, or unincorporated with no more than 10,000 people. Next slide. This one I'm particularly fond of, I guess I could say, because this is a continuation of the Smart Grid program, if you want to call it that started 15 years ago now. You see looking in the middle of the slide there, the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. So this is another $3 billion, $600 million each year to further do the Smart Grid program. You may be aware, I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm particularly focused on what the developments have been here, including, and then there's a link here, for a very successful Smart Grid program that occurred under the earlier program. So this was the Pacific Northwest Smart Grid Demonstration Program. get that acronym or initialism. And so here's another substantial amount of funding to do more work in that area. We have, of course, since decided that we don't like the term smart grid. We like grid modernization better. Fine. This will be an important funding program. Next. Slide, please. Advanced manufacturing. An RFI was issued for this just a few days ago, I think Thursday, with responses due mid-September. And you'll see some pretty specific eligibility requirements there for manufacturing firms to be eligible in terms of how big a business they are, both in revenues and employees, and what their energy bills are. And also the requirement that the project be either in or immediately adjacent to a census tract, which is a defined thing. There's a link there, where a coal mine closed in 2000 or later, or a coal-fired generating plant was retired in 2010 or later. One can assume, one can infer that there might have been one or more senators that were particularly interested in adding this aspect to the program. And so those who will be seeking funding on this program will have to address the census tract requirement. Next slide, please. We also had some information from Katrina on this one. Thank you. This is for clean energy demonstration programs on current or former mine land. I have here in the slide, is shown by the quotations, the exact definitions of what constitutes a clean energy project. It includes storage. What constitutes mine land, which has very specific statutory definitions that one would want to get quite conversant in. Also to note the 500 million, at least as currently information that's out right now, the composition of that funding. Are we talking grants, cooperative agreements, et cetera? That's not specified in the statute, or as I read it, the RFI that came out. So that's a color of money question. What sort of funding might come out from that? Next slide, please. So that's the whirlwind 8-bucket tour of IJA. To plug Cleantech Strategies, we have 4 companies that we're working with now, pursuing IJA funding, also pursuing a completely different program that we're not talking about here, the Department of Defense Innovation Units program on long duration, extended duration storage. We've worked extensively with other companies. You can see additional facts here about the experience that we have. And I'm really glad that we have the opportunity here to talk about all these funding opportunities that we should use to get storage to a higher TRL and a higher MRL. So the technology readiness level and the manufacturing readiness level, all with an eye towards onshoring, so that storage is not like petroleum in terms of being foreign sourced. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Russ, and thanks to all of our presenters. Why don't we get everybody back on camera here, because we're going to start addressing questions. We have a lot of questions, and so if you're a speaker and you can turn on your camera, that would be great. Dan, if you're with us and you want to join us for Q&A and you can turn on your camera, that would be terrific.
I'm here, but I'm not able to turn on my camera.
Okay.
I'm on my phone. For some reason, it doesn't allow me to join by camera.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you. We'll try to get to as many of these as we can. So first off, a question on Oset. Does Oset have an international component or collaborative goals with other nations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We very much do want to work with our international partners and have already started having some of those conversations with country partners as well as international companies. So we don't have a formal international program, but my office is working to make sure that we are in touch with and learning from and sharing with those international partners as well. And we will be up at the Global Clean Energy event in Pittsburgh, the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation. And so if anyone is interested, that side has a business forum, and that is a free public forum for business connections along with international and government, and all of the Oset leadership will be there as well. Thanks.
Great. We have a lot of sort of definitional questions. What's included, what's covered, what's eligible, and so forth. So I'll start with some of these, and anybody who wants to can jump in. So first off, does rural and remote area include Indian nations?
Yes, that's a great question. So Congress defined our scope for that program as cities, towns, and unincorporated areas. So it's very, very broad. And we do absolutely look to and envision working with tribal governments and communities on tribal lands. We jokingly say that this is the Earth provision because it is so broad. So I would say stay tuned for more information for our workshops in the fall, because we absolutely will want to hear from everyone, including those that are working with communities on tribal lands as well as tribal governments.
Okay. We had a few questions about hydrogen, whether it's being considered within these various programs as a type of storage technology or not, either cryo or salt cavern or anything else. Anybody who wants to address that, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I can start here. So for the EASY programs, we are currently not planning to include hydrogen. The reason, in part, is because there's already billions more dollars for hydrogen, which Katrina can speak a little more about. But because hydrogen is represented so well elsewhere in the bill, we are looking at prioritizing other technologies for EASY specifically.
Yeah, and just building on that, that holds true for the other Oset provisions that I mentioned as well. Sorry, go ahead, Russ.
Oh, pardon me. I was just going to say that one way, easy way, relatively speaking, to get at the hydrogen provision is get the IJA bill and search hydrogen, and it'll call up all the different places. There's a specific section devoted to it. I don't have the billions associated with it, but it's substantial.
Okay. Somebody wants to know whether utility scale necessarily, how is that defined? Does it have to be physically co-located? Does it have to be owned by a utility? Does it need to be somehow logistically tied into a grid or sub-grid system? How is a utility how is that utility storage sort of defined?
Yeah, so we have some preliminary definitions in the RFI document, and I might be able to link that in the chat actually in a second. We propose this sort of store scale, which is essentially a TRL, but for energy storage. And utility scale really is one of those scales. We're still honing in on the precise definition. There's a lot of different ways we could define that. For the most part, we're looking at size of the system, a certain megawatt range, and sort of where it is deployed. Grid connected essentially, and that's how we've been thinking about utility scale at this point. But there's more definitions in the RFI, and there are more definitions that'll be released once we have out the formal announcements.
In the RFI, just to mention, Ben, for people's guidance, the 5 megawatt number was used for the RFI purposes for that middle level utility scale demonstration initiative, or excuse me, demonstration project. Yeah.
Thanks, Russ. You're very up on it. Yes, that is correct, and that's something we've certainly gotten feedback on as well. So we'll be coming out with more formal guidance and with our announcements.
Yeah, in general, utility scale need not be directly grid connected. It just has to be the right size. So, for example, storage on industrial campuses would definitely be utility scale, but that does not necessarily qualify it for the provisions of the bill.
Okay. Somebody wants to know specifically regarding the Mine Land program, why wind is not an eligible technology in that program. And also if somebody can put the RFI link somewhere in the chat, perhaps, or on screen.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I'd put the
wind energy.
Yeah, I can cover that one. Hopefully you can hear me. I put the link to the RFI in the chat for the organizers, so maybe Anna could dump that in the broader chat. If not, I can try to do that. In terms of why wind was not included, that is a question for Congress. So we are very much following congressional direction on that, and they did not include wind. So that's something, again, that DOE is just following what Congress told us to do. So I would point you to your representatives on the Hill.
Thank you. We also have somebody else asking for hot links to all of these funding opportunities. So that's probably a pretty common question for a lot of our attendees. It would be, what we can do is include that in the maybe in the slides when we post those. They'll be posted on the Cisa website. We could, if you guys will send us links to the various program application materials, we could include those at the end.
There's this link for every program on the slides that I sent.
Great. Okay. Somebody says, I think my technology would be a good fit for EASY. What is the best way to connect to the program? Is that, I assume that's also through the links that you mentioned.
Yeah, Katrina, is there a Oset email list people can join for updates?
Yeah, exactly. So I can put that in the chat as well. So if you want to be added to the Oset newsletter, or you just want to be connected for further information, I'll put the email in the chat, and that's the easiest way to reach my office, and we can take it from there.
I'll also include a link, I'll put it in our chat as well, to the Energy Storage Grand Challenge email list. These announcements will certainly be forwarded there as well.
Great. Somebody wants to know, they say, I heard that states were eligible. What about counties? Anybody want to speak to counties and I guess other municipal entities, cities, and so forth?
There are a couple of the programs where the eligible entity definition includes local municipality. Yes. So, for example,
do we know what they
are? So the 4103B, it includes local government units. So that's the Electric Grid Reliability and Resilience RD&D program with the $5 billion from federal financial assistance. It includes local government units.
Okay. Somebody wants to know if the electric cooperative that they work for wanted to install multiple batteries on their system behind the meter. Is there a federal funding available for this? If so, which program would this fall under?
Can you repeat that, Todd, the eligibility?
Yeah, sure. Somebody wants to know if an electric cooperative wants to install batteries on their system behind the meter. Is there, which program would it fall under? And I guess that would depends somewhat on whether this is long duration or not. Obviously, long duration would probably fall under one of the long duration storage programs.
Yeah, with a number of caveats, and knowing that we really can't say anything for sure right now about eligibility, we are intending for that easy demonstration program to be the maybe lower maturity or behind the meter type systems. So that's what we're looking at for behind the meter now, but we don't have any specific guidance yet on where precise systems might fall for the different easy programs.
And going to one of the resilience programs, the 4101, that calls out utilities, which should include co-ops.
I'll just add as well, for the rural and remote provision, since it is so broad and we are still designing it, all of those caveats to say it is potentially something you could put under that provision, but again, recognizing that OSED programs are not funding straight deployment. So there will need to be a demonstration element to any application that is ultimately submitted. So I would, with a big caveat, I would say potentially rural and remote, but stay tuned for more information on the more detailed requirements.
Okay. Well, actually, that brings up a question as to whether the various programs and types of funding could be combined. So if one had, for example, a rural and remote demonstration project or a long duration rural project or something of that sort, are these all mutually exclusive, these funding sources?
I can come in first and then would invite Ben to add anything. I mean, the provisions themselves, to my knowledge, do not exclude multiple applications for a project that wants to do different things, perhaps across the development cycle. And so the idea with the OSED program, as I showed on that TRL slide, is that we are really doing a handoff to the next stage in technology commercialization. And so we very much do want our projects to be replicated and scaled. And so the hope would be that something you're applying for funding from OSED for is not going to be something you would be applying for straight deployment funding or even earlier stage R&D funding. So with the various OSED provisions, there would be, to my knowledge, nothing that Congress has told us that would exclude you from applying for two different demonstration project opportunities if the specific project met all of the eligibility requirements. I don't know, Ben, if you want to come in with anything further.
Yeah, and that's a great question. That's something we've talked a little bit about in DOE. And it can certainly get complicated. Having one project for multiple provisions and different contingencies of what gets accepted. But generally, what Katrina said is aligns. Where at this stage, I can't think of anything that would preclude it, as long as you fully meet the eligibility criteria and be judged independently for both.
One other consideration is if you get federal funding under one program, you can't count that as your match under another program.
Well, that is a good point, and it brings up another question from somebody who wants to know whether there's a 50% cost share requirement for all of these funds.
I can come in for OSED and then invite colleagues. So in general, OSED will be using a 50-50 cost share match. I think we are aware for the rural and remote provision that may be challenging. And so that is something that we are contemplating. But in general, yes, 50-50 for OSED programs. And I'll invite colleagues to come in for non-OSED programs.
Might be challenging, particularly for tribal and urban disadvantaged communities.
Fortunately, a number of the programs have this federal financial assistance aspect to it that I think we're going to learn more about that could address this issue.
Okay, anybody else? All right. Couple of technology eligibility questions. Microgrids and pumped hydro. Are microgrids and not together but separately? Are microgrids eligible, and is pumped hydro considered to be eligible?
So for easy, certainly innovative pumped hydro, we're looking at being eligible. We're trying at this stage to not preclude as much as we can. We want to be as inclusive as possible at this stage, while also considering that we want to move the needle. Whatever we end up funding, we want it to move the needle. So for whatever technology that receives funding, presumably it will be some kind of innovative system and not just what we've done in the past. Microgrids are an interesting question, and I'm sure Russ can jump in with some of the grid provisions where microgrids are mentioned. For the easy programs specifically, the emphasis is on the storage. So certainly microgrid could be an application, and it could be a really good application for storage. But these programs are aimed at funding the storage piece and the long duration innovative storage component. I'm sure others have thoughts on this question too.
Yeah, I'll come in for the Mineland provision. Congress did explicitly include storage, including pumped storage and compressed air storage. And for rural and remote, microgrids are explicitly included. Also for Mineland, microgrids are explicitly included as well. So that's what we were given by Congress.
I'd add that the various resilience and grid modernization provisions are entirely consistent with what we all now think, which is that microgrids are part of the grid and they're part of resilience.
And they work best coupled with storage.
Yep.
Okay. We have a question regarding HUD Assisted Housing. Is there an opportunity for HUD Assisted Housing to participate in demonstration projects? And if so, is there coordination with HUD? HUD, for anyone who doesn't know, is Housing and Urban Development, the federal agency. And the questioner goes on to say, affordable housing is looking at how to ensure vulnerable populations, both residents and the surrounding community, can benefit from energy storage, especially during climate disruptions. However, cost share will be an issue. Anybody want to speak to that?
Yeah, for Mineland and rural remote, we have not had explicit conversations with HUD. We do maintain an interagency working group that DOE coordinates, not at the White House level, but that DOE coordinates for the Mineland provision. To my knowledge, we've not been connecting with HUD around rural and remote. To my knowledge, there's nothing in the legislation that would preclude that. So potentially, I would say wait and see what the provision looks like, but Congress has been quite clear with us, and it is important to DOE and Oset that we explicitly do try to reach underserved communities. And so, to the degree that that becomes something that is in the selection criteria or program, criteria, that could be interesting, but I would just say stay tuned for more information.
Yeah, same answer for easy. We haven't had those conversations explicitly, but it's certainly something that we want to prioritize.
Okay. Somebody's asking about vehicle to grid demonstration projects. Is vehicle to grid considered eligible in terms of demonstration project funding?
I think it's the same answer as HUD. It's not explicitly excluded, and I don't know that we have contemplated anything specific around that for either rural, remote, or Mineland. Ben?
Yeah, it's come up a little bit with easy, and that's certainly a tricky one, somewhat of an edge case, and we are proposing precluding generator flexibility technologies. We really want the emphasis to be on the storage technology itself and the new application of a storage technology. So I can't say one way or the other right now for V2G. You know, I certainly think it's a really interesting area, but unclear yet if it will fall in an easy program or somewhere else.
There are other parts of IJA that address EVs.
If at all, it would have to be aggregated to involve large numbers.
Okay. Somebody is asking, will DOE be promoting integrated energy systems and closed loop manufacturing to achieve sustainability with minimum environmental impact? And if somebody would speak to maybe what integrated energy systems and closed loop manufacturing is, as part of your answer to that, that would probably be helpful to some of the attendees.
I am not super familiar with the 40209 RFI that went out. That's the Advanced Energy Manufacturing and Recycling Grant. So I would point you to that. That RFI, as well as the accompanying technical assistance announcement that was released a couple of months ago, I think at this point, would be the best places to see what they're thinking. I can't speak in detail to that.
Yeah, I'm less familiar with that as well. And generally, the manufacturing side is out of scope for EASY.
So the RFI for the advanced manufacturing, as you say, Katrina, the one that's closest, that just came out last week, and so I'd refer that questioner to that RFI.
Okay. Somebody wants to know whether demonstration projects will be associated to the SBIR ecosystem in any way.
Yeah,
and again, if
I
somebody
can definitely tell
speak
you
what SBIR is, that would be helpful.
Oh, sure. So for Oset, I'll speak kind of generally because I think that's probably the best place to start. So we are having those conversations right now for Oset writ large. And that's the small business innovation research opportunity space that has been funded by multiple offices across DOE. And so we're right now considering and talking to colleagues there about what that might look like. So nothing firmed up to share at this point, but can definitely tell you we are thinking about that and looking for those opportunities and having those conversations.
Okay. If nobody else wants to speak to that, will demonstration projects apply to commercial manufacturing at scale of a new technology? So I guess I'm not sure how that's meant exactly, but it sounds like they're asking whether commercial manufacturing at scale of a new technology could be considered a demonstration project.
What TRL?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, oh, go ahead, Russ.
Sorry, I would say what TRL are they talking about? If they're talking technology that's an earlier stage, it's not a TRL 6 or something like that, then it's different funding.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, depending on the provision and where it lives, it potentially could. I mean, 40209 is looking at manufacturing that wants to also include expansion opportunities at existing facilities, manufacturing facilities, for example. Oset does have an industrial emissions demonstration program that you'll be learning more about in the coming months there as well, that will be looking to demonstrate technologies with industry. And so, back to Russ's comment, I would say make sure you're lining up where on that technology readiness level you're looking and what technology and what that looks like.
Okay, here's a more specific question along the same lines. This person says, we are manufacturing an LTO chemistry battery and would appreciate communicating directly with one of your agencies within the DOE regarding securing funding for manufacturing and advancing our patented battery and ESS to market. What steps would be next, as we are very near testing completion for a recognized testing lab? So this is an example. I'm sure there are many other people who are similarly trying to advance a technology or patented product to commercialization or bring it to market. Any thoughts on where these folks should go?
That sounds a bit too early for Oset, so I would suggest potentially the Office of Electricity. Just guessing based on what you said, but Ben, do you have any reaction?
Yeah, maybe Advanced Manufacturing Office as well within EERE. I mean, that's one of those examples where we may be happy to discuss, but ultimately it'll come down to the open funding announcements, what's available. And yeah, that might be a little early stage for a lot of these demo programs. It's my first impression.
Dr. Gyuk or Dan Borneo, do you want to speak at all to R&D within the lab ecosystem or under OE? Is there any information there that people might be interested in, and if they're looking at new battery technologies?
Well, the laboratories and the Office of Electricity, of course, has an active energy storage program, quite apart from the provisions of the infrastructure bill, although similar in its aims, and it's very much oriented towards helping new technologies get to a point where they can have demonstrations and hopefully eventually enter be viable to enter commercial application. The funding scale, of course, tends to be much smaller. We don't have billions available, but not even, well, we have millions available, but not billions.
And to add to that, Todd, if people are interested in working with Sandia on developing and implementing new technologies in small pilot projects, my email will be on the end there, and please feel free to reach out to me.
I'm going to make the gratuitous comment that the billions now to do TRL-6 demonstrations wouldn't have been possible without the millions earlier in the TRL. Period. It's
Very much as a handoff.
Thank you, Russ.
Yeah, there's very much a handoff approach.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a part of this for folks who are attending and involved in developing technologies and bringing them to market is figuring out at what point to plug into which program. And as somebody said, that really depends a lot on where they are in terms of technological readiness. And it looks like we're getting some information on screen. I guess you could follow up. Do we have a TRL slide? I don't think we have a TRL slide in this presentation.
My deck, if Anna could pull it up.
Well, we'll work on that, and we'll go on with the questions while that's happening. So,
you know, one comment I just wanted to add. So, so I lead the projects group at Sandia under Dr. Gyuk. But now that there's all this money in this Office of Demonstrations, we are changing our focus a bit to go into the more innovative technologies and trying to get the newer technologies out into the field, because we feel the OCED program will take care of all the lithium ion and some of the newer stuff over there. So we are kind of changing our focus at Sandia Projects to go into the more innovative and trying out the new batteries. Not necessarily, well, we will be doing the long duration stuff with the California Energy Commission and NYSERDA up in New York, but we're also looking for these up and coming battery technologies, or I should say storage technologies.
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, good. I think we're going to have to leave it there as we are at the 2:30 mark, and that's the end of our scheduled time. And I want to make sure we have a moment to announce some upcoming webinars, and thanks to our presenters very much. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. We did have an extraordinarily large number of them, and you know, we will post the webinar recording and the slides, and if we can, we will add a slide onto the deck that has links to all those program application sites and forms that people were asking about, because you can't, as people noted, you can't click on those through the chat, so we'll try to include those when we post the slides. Anna, do you have some upcoming webinars?
Yes, thank you, Todd.
Thank you. So we have several upcoming webinars, and I just want to mention there's an upcoming STAP webinar, that's the second bullet here, looking at EPRI's, one of EPRI's tools they developed, DER-VET, which informs energy storage and storage-enabled microgrid project decisions. That's coming up in August. We also have a couple of other interesting webinars coming up that you can see here. And as I said earlier, it looks as though we will need to come back with a second in this series here to look at additional federal funding that is appears to be about to become available in the Inflation Reduction Act, currently in Congress. So Anna, any final words?
Nope, you just about covered it. Thank you to all of our presenters and to all of our attendees who have come today. Just a reminder that all the upcoming webinars and the recording of this one will be available at the hyperlink that you see at the bottom of the slide, cisa.org/webinars. You all will get an email in about a week with the recording and the PDF presentation slides. Thank you, everyone. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.